Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jeff Brenzel, and I teach here at Yale in the Philosophy and Humanities departments. In my role as Master of Timothy Dwight College, I am also the official steward of the Chubb Fellowship at Yale University. So it is on behalf of the Chubb Fellowship, of Timothy Dwight College, of the President and officers and fellows of Yale University, the faculty and staff and students of Yale, and the entire New Haven area community that we welcome His Holiness the 17th Karmapa and his delegation to our community and to our campus. I want to recognize briefly the co-sponsors and the other collaborators who have worked hard to arrange and support the visit of His Holiness and his delegation here to Yale. In addition to the Chubb Fellowship, these are the Yale Himalaya Initiative, the Forum on Religion and Ecology, the Yale Religious Studies Department, the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, the Yale Divinity School, and the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies. We are particularly grateful, of course, to His Holiness himself for his generosity of time and spirit in making himself astonishingly available during his time here, putting forth a strenuous effort to meet or speak or connect with so many communities within and without the university who hoped for the opportunity to see and hear him during his stay here at Yale. I want to make special mention of the many members of the Tibetan community from the entire eastern region of the United States who have traveled here to be with us this afternoon, as well as many other Buddhist brothers and sisters from other lands and places. To all of you, I want to extend our warmest welcome. Here this afternoon, His Holiness will be presenting this year's Chubb Fellowship Address. And I should say just a brief word about the fellowship itself. Hendon Chubb was an 1895 graduate of Yale's Sheffield Scientific School, and in 1936, he made a substantial gift to the university with the intent of encouraging Yale students to take a particular interest in public service. Since 1949, as Hendon Chubb himself approved, the university has used his endowment to underwrite a visiting speakers program bringing extraordinary public figures to the campus. Past Chubb Fellows include 4 presidents of the United States, presidents of 8 other countries, Nobel and other international prize winners, and more than 150 other regional, national, and internationally prominent persons, all of whom have been noteworthy in some particular way for their personal distinction in service to the common good of all. It is now my honor to ask Andrew Quintman to the podium. Professor Quintman teaches at Yale in the Department of Religious Studies, where he specializes in the Buddhist traditions of Tibet and the Himalaya. His work surveys Buddhist literature and history, sacred geography and pilgrimage, and the visual cultures of the wider Himalayan region. He has written several books on the early Tibetan saint Milarepa, including an English translation of the life of Milarepa, who is a founding figure in the Karmapa's lineage. Well, please welcome Professor Quintman.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon. It is my great pleasure and distinct honor to introduce His Holiness the 17th Karmapa, Orgyen Chinle Dorje, who will share with us today his insight and vision on 3 crucial topics for our time: compassion, religion, and the environment. In 1949, at the request of Yale's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, 100 volumes of the Tibetan Buddhist canon were printed from wood blocks in Lhasa, wrapped in leather satchels and loaded onto ponies. They traveled by caravan to Calcutta and then freighter to New Haven, where they arrived in 1950 and were installed in the library with great ceremony. This gift, presented to Yale by the current Dalai Lama, who was only 14 years old at the time and still living in Lhasa, planted a seed of Yale's connection to Tibet, a seed that has now taken root and blossomed with the visit by His Holiness the Karmapa. The Karmapa is part of a Tibetan tradition of formally recognized reincarnations known as tulku, wherein a young child is identified as the re-embodiment of a deceased master. The Karmapas are the head of the Karmakagyu branch of Tibetan Buddhism and are the oldest such reincarnation lineage in the Himalayan region, extending back some 900 years. His Holiness Orgen Chinle Dorje is the 17th in his line. The first Karmapa, Dusum Kempa, was born in the early 12th century and is said to have left a letter foretelling the conditions of his future rebirth. Since then, such prediction letters have become a hallmark of the lineage and, together with other religious signs, have been used to identify subsequent Karmapas. The second Karmapa, Karmapakshi, was renowned for his spiritual mastery, which led to his invitation to the court of Kublai Khan. The third Karmapa, Rangchung Dorje, was famous for his exegesis on philosophy and esoteric Buddhist theory. And subsequent Karmapas became consummate religious teachers, great scholars, virtuoso meditators, artists, and poets. They were also teachers who carried out the activities of a Buddha, as the title Karmapa is sometimes etymologized. The 16th Karmapa, Rangchung Ritbe Dorje, fled Tibet in 1959 and established a monastic seat in Sikkim, India. He is remembered for his great love of animals, especially birds, and also for his ability to communicate with them. The 16th was part of an early wave of Tibetan teachers who brought traditional Buddhist teachings to the West. He visited the United States, first in 1974 and again in 1977. And during this period, he established a major monastic center outside Woodstock, New York, which now has dozens of affiliated centers around the world. Orgen Chinle Dorje was born in 1985 in eastern Tibet. And based upon his predecessor's prediction letter and testament, he was recognized and then enthroned as the 17th Karmapa at the traditional monastery of his lineage at Serpu in central Tibet. And I was fortunate to meet His Holiness numerous times at Serpu, and it was clear even then that he was an extraordinary individual. In 1999, he determined that he was no longer able to receive an adequate religious education inside Tibet, and so over the course of 8 days in late December and early January, he undertook a harrowing journey across the Himalayan range. The story is quite dramatic. It includes a daring escape through an upper-story window of the monastery, a trek across frozen mountain passes, and horseback travel through northern Nepal. He eventually reached Dharamsala in India, where he maintains a close relationship with another of Tibet's great religious figures, the 14th Dalai Lama. At 29 years old, His Holiness is already recognized as a leading religious figure of his generation, as an accomplished Buddhist teacher. But he is also a prolific artist, poet, and playwright. He is a religious reformer dedicated to gender equality and the restoration of bhikshuni, or full monastic ordination for women. He's a social activist committed to human rights, vegetarianism, and the ethical treatment of animals. He is an environmentalist focused on the protection of Himalayan landscapes and natural resources through an eco-monastic program called Koryuk, the Tibetan word for environment, that networks more than 50 religious institutions across the Himalaya. In His Holiness's own words, Whatever it is I do, I want it to have a long-term visible impact and for it to be practical. If I have the opportunity, I would most like to restore the natural environment in the Himalayas and Tibet, and to especially protect the forests, the water, and the wildlife of the region. And I think it is not an exaggeration to say that His Holiness the 17th Karmapa will revolutionize Buddhism, not only in the Tibetan tradition, but also on a global scale. The reach of the Karmapa's activities is reflected in the way that his visit has brought people together across Yale University, from the arts and sciences to public health and environmental studies, faculty, graduate students, and undergraduates. Some time ago, long before His Holiness's visit had been publicly announced, one of the 8 Tibetans who works at Yale appeared in my office and enthusiastically said, "I heard the Karmapa is coming." Well, he was. Today's address, entitled Compassion in Action, Buddhism and the Environment, is the direct result of converging interests, or as Buddhists like to say, of causes and conditions that span the university and its wider community. So the seed, first planted some 65 years ago, has now begun to flower. So please join me now in welcoming His Holiness the 17th Karmapa. Do you want to stand next to me or you want to sit? It's just for a minute. So thank you, Your Holiness. So let me conclude with just a few words about today's program. Following His Holiness's address, he will be joined on stage by myself and my colleague, Mary Evelyn Tucker, for a short conversation about the main themes of the talk: compassion, religion, and the environment. Mary Evelyn is a senior lecturer and research scholar at Yale University, where she teaches in a joint master's degree program between the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and the Yale Divinity School. And she is also, and perhaps more importantly, the director of the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale, together with her husband, John Grimm. The program will conclude with an opportunity for His Holiness to address questions from the audience. Now, over the past week or so, we've collected questions by email from those who would attend today's address, and we have received an enthusiastic response and have selected a representative sample of them. So I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge at least a few individuals who were instrumental in making His Holiness's visit to Yale possible. So my heartfelt thanks go, of course, to the Chubb Fellowship, to Master Jeff Brenzel and Susan Wigler, to George Joseph of the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies, and of course to the incredible staff, the indefatigable staff of the Yale Himalaya Initiative, including Program Director Alark Saxena, Anoba Gurung, Priyankar Chand, and Sangye Dorje. So, Your Holiness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
다동원들이야 상월로리야 아니 섬지 제시들이
First, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you, Tashidele.
제시들이 된다시고지다.
Lasso, Dondashe Gogudai.
네, 마신 제시들이 가양하고.
Tashidele means, may you be filled with auspicious goodness and joy.
아니 다리제 Yale University리아 용하기 가수의 미세 대체장 쇼스 송체 내야 용하 처리 취업당 믹스에도 드린데 가수의 처리 취업들 투시 샤인 다리제 Yale University 용하기 처리 취업대 가수의 쇼스 대송 처리 취업들 투시 샤인.
And I would also like to thank everyone at Yale University who has been responsible for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to be here.
And honestly, during the 시엔조 뭐 참으로리아 아니 도시샤이.
And I would also like to thank all of you who have come here today.
지당기 가출에다 아메리카리아 용아들이 팅스ум버를 시차디가래 제장 네 그뒤네 아메리카리아 연주산의 지셈리아 가출에다 지 미세다지 장왕기 천왕스는자도 다나시 디기 천왕 사버를 진기에 천왕용데도 안 라버도 다리 University 망부질리아 자르체 네네 가르에 자르체 소수임리아 루루드 토치두산에 안 망부지 가르 소수용에 로정 망부시 태버지당 다나시 가르에 덴덴 셈리아 지 가르에 믹스에다 천왕침부 총수샤이스.
This is my third visit to the United States of America. And whenever I come here, I have a special feeling of freedom and joy, especially this time, the third time, as I've been visiting several universities. I've been overjoyed by the experience of meeting with many students and witnessing a little bit of their study and university life.
다들 예시아디 니지당 구육고를 시야도시 도시에가래.
Now, the topic you've asked me to address is compassion and the environment.
당의 지 background 시위는 미망부치 알이야. 아니 교랑 아니 지 가스에 구육고리야. 지 토나용과를 지당 안디 토리아 아니 지 가스에 내가 최고하고 보지. 대 감정 background이 가르치 진행하고 용데도 제장의 강술이야. 디고리아 디스트라이 더버총소스.
To give you a little bit of background, many people have asked me, what inspired you to become so concerned about the environment? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that to begin.
아니 나께서도 별 샤쇼 롱버치 롱버 구교르지 서머로 다든지 롱버 차디어래 제자들이야 아니 가서 미세기 가서 modern development 카미야체 간다르지 배 상무로지 런중 컴리아 제주메 그럽시다 소주메 방소메 다 드리지 네버지 드리지 알이야 네디어래 제상 로 깨버네 손데 로 둥고 봐도 엔드제기 지 쿠유지 나로 살론 충분당 안다는 신기 아주 수균기 다가서 초아계당 디토안에 쿠유리아 아주 통신으로 그렇지 자치모 그거지요 봐 다는 쿠유당 미버로 제바 미세근 제바 샤당 다디미네 진짜지 수수의 냠수녀와 고급 중요비 인두산에 디균선 때에 셈리아 숲톱 매버서 말아 셈리아 그뒤네 지 상해를 텐데야 다 간다 디 지금 천나 사무지 진여버 지금 그 초도.
I was born in a quite isolated part of eastern Tibet, and where I was born, there had been no great modern development. So I lived in a very natural and somewhat pristine environment. Until I was 7, this was the only environment in which I lived. So I experienced firsthand as a child a feeling of intimate connection with the natural environment. And I retain to this day a constant and extremely clear recollection of this.
But example to show you, but I also pay you rich redang, energy chudan, the Mangware, the Mangchang as a Holy Spirit, some of that is such a land. 나 하다 루다 데 삼로 당치 데 네데비 이치치기하래 제상 아주 시라기 다데지 사단 도다 데데기 두시에 맞제비치체 the living beings and the living system of 데데지 비지당 나줄라 be so necessary and so crucial 데데지 비지 아주 이제 두시기하래 다나 심변한 아주 농배의 육주들이야래. 다 추. 다 법추.
Upju.
나 법추 디즈나로레 스팀 서머다 가라서 다들. 다 법추 나로레야 남주 베나 라바 트리안더보당 돌로 트리안더 견제 트리안더들이 지가 말해. 다나 신기 베나 탑장 나로레 메땅베 겁라. 양现在不着急，甚至不着急，每个人稍微比呢，大家的独家着急不急 ，pollution 差着也不着急，这着急个，加上这个套呢，看到，讲说，可是给生活拿落来呀 ，nature environment 的，即讲说，啥都是这样子没不起，这 living systems 个大多，沙当、路当。这个都是去第三呢，这都是上面小样的事。
For example, where I was born, we regarded and experienced our environment as a living system, a living beings. The mountains, the sources of water, were all regarded as the dwelling places of what I would call holy spirits of various kinds. We therefore respected every aspect of the environment as part of a living system. We didn't wash our clothes or even our hands in flowing water sources. We didn't cast any kind of garbage or any kind of other pollutant into the fire in our hearth. So we regarded the entire environment as innately sacred.
这上挺上 challenge 卡了儿是呢，俺这个路边呢，我们去 artificial garbage 什么的，这个肯尼你了说不说？肯尼买不因子，俺这到肯尼厂了的 reusable 是呢，大概的这个人中的肯尼嘛，对不 artificial 肯尼是给要嘛的。 这上挺上 artificial 肯尼的说来源就是啥呢？俺这个路边米里啊，或者上班了我们能行个人中的，假如 garbage 能行，那这个有啥呢？俺个假如来大家，可能没不差多的什么今天这什么东西？今天这个团呢，假如的，我们个错了，看他去就是上挺上个。 artificial thing 假如我不是来源就是提出，假如那当卡子没定下是我做嘛的。
One of the challenges that those who live in such an environment face nowadays is the use of artificial and non-biodegradable substances, because for the first time they have to deal with real garbage. we didn't really have garbage because we used pretty well everything up, and anything that we did dispose of was easily biodegradable. And now, because of the introduction of artificial materials that are not biodegradable, we have to come up with new ways to dispose of them. And so this, to give you one example, is changing the lifestyle of people in such places.
Canada tigi chungdu gi cheza ngechun environmental ki chungdu philosophy dang tiga science da keke singya mare ina ti ngelia knowledge machungwe ngelia emotional somar tachi sonaru de susudang energy karu rangjung ki sonaru di ngene chung digital knowledge gel chungro cheza ti junzan dene kada digital jamjo je indusane ti junzan dene da 다다지 런중쿠 걸 삼던 뉴스단에 다지 knowledge 직보 많이 봐. 다대야 손안의 집에 토네 자르지 용도 섬섬 주세요.
Obviously, as a child, I had no knowledge of philosophy or science, but I had a strong emotional connection with and a strong feeling for the environment, which means that now that I've begun to acquire a little bit of knowledge, it isn't just knowledge. For me, it's based on my strong feelings.
예삼리아 가주에다 구류기 다다디 가주에다 구유 순교 디꼴이야 아주 상물로 단 도나 지 가주에 지글 직된 섬으로 받아지 아주 여기 남윤기 아니 미스디 더 구유 순교디 잡아디 구유당 아주 잡아디 하고 쳐블이야 아주 여기 ene 가주에 핀준 뚜루 나 핀준 가주에 딘중 잡아디 하고 가야디 계신부 차대도 성도
I think that in order to understand the necessity of environmental protection, we need to understand how connected we are to one another and to our environment. So in order to understand our connectedness, I think we need to understand interdependence.
사회세 전배그 다른 가수기 류인데냐 간다 뭐 망부질 때네 지정중기 다 구들이야 된체 아주 소경 제거버지다 내거버지 차대야 알았어
라 네 야보 고금다
나랑 게 야보 고금다
야보 고금다
lots of echo
Yeah, I'm having a really hard time hearing. I'm sorry.
what to do
I don't know. Maybe if I move back.
really
Might be better. That's all.
maybe you can sit down
No? Did excited.
this is
That's all.
I forgot my things also. Okay. The 아주기 사회 세당 사칼라당 아니 죄악 둘로당 안타는 아주기 륜디네야 상물로 가셔에 자 정중기 구요리아 댄치 촉거버지당 아니 정중 구요를 대네 내거버지 차대요 그래서
For example, for us to acquire or eat any food, have clothes to wear, or even to have the bodies we do, all of these things require the interconnectedness of many aspects, of many things and many people within the environment.
세상 아술르다 숭진의 메시지로 남배시에 숭진의
올라서
object subject 아주 object subject 베너지 치기 런중 쿠유데 바지 object 잡지 아주 subject 잡지 딘디지기 간다 boundaries somewhere 다들지기 가르에 디버루 버룰래야 파타 예버지 딘디지 아주 통과하래 세상 아주 딘데가 파타디 장타디 니어 동거야 지다 boundaries this maps 과디 개침지 차되고 성 딩아주디 가주디 딘중기 따와탈 딘지
The value of understanding interdependence in this regard is that we often feel at some distance from our environment. We divide the world into subject and object, and we feel that the external environment is an object separated from us by some kind of boundary and at some distance from ourselves as subjects. We need to dissolve this artificial boundary and decrease the distance between ourselves and our environment.
Today in Hindustan, nga zuigi rangda kuyu gin jeba de ngomati de nga zu shedo tuya ji dang nga zu da kuyu gin jeba de ta nier dong dong ya lia dong tu de sang do stine chebina.
And I think if we do that, we can begin to feel how connected we are to our environment and how little distance, if any, there really is between ourselves and our environment.
The pebe nalolia chigi kuyu dang nangi semjen din jeba de bezuen karasharasana ne de chugi bezuen shat. Chi kuyu di ne de che nangi semjen di de chu de che. Chi kuyu de gi ngasul sustaining somewhere hold as somewhere hold de che de che da and nangi semjen damje semjen de gi energy kuyu de la then nutrients somewhere da ji de de che de chi da de yin jusan di junsin de na 디기 뇌의 주기 가지고 벤션도 디기 아주도 쿠유 잡아디 and 사무인 되지당 energy necessary 되지 다들 전통으로 삼정게 있어.
In Tibetan, we often refer to the relationship between the external environment and the beings who inhabit that environment as the relationship between a container and its contents. We are all held by and within the environment we inhabit. We are like the contents or even the nutrients within such an environment. And it seems that it's necessary for us to begin to acknowledge that interrelationship.
Hindustan tindeji level tense and kuyugi ngasulia ji karwe penugi shugente or la ngasu yang kuyulia and shugen shate others. Me mawaji samle nalolia kuyu sadi natural sad be yachimbu yibo shuchimbu yimba. Tene Hindustan and ngasugi natural shugente to marasamduchi. The reality we need to tell you the member. Nazu in a pashu can take your Kuyu in a shuken as to singers.
We therefore also need to acknowledge the fact that our environment can affect us and we can also affect our environment. Some people have the idea that the environment is so vast and so primordial that nothing we do is actually going to affect it. Unfortunately, that's been proven not to be the case. And we need to begin to acknowledge the interdependence, the aspect of interdependence that is our effect on the environment, even as our environment affects us.
Hindustan, in a tang azulia to take knowledge somewhere, the Nichigi Karshwe. Understand you the deep in government. Kadu in Azul, Guenci Karchagarasana, understanding their energy person somewhere. That around the Cheda Casa 7, understanding the person, the Barulea, parta chimbu yede bichi understand the jikcha person gi khurangi namjung gi lega ledang da sam dang de understanding de sira motim bichi adrin bisane ti gyunsen de ne ngajogi da understanding cheba na singi and kansa digi reaction da ku behavior de tena sinji yomr cheblia ngajulia da ji emotional levels na down from heart somar beta ji ning tabane ngajulia de kuyolia simgurudang ningji de kwa de kechim.
Well, we need to acknowledge these things. Mere knowledge or understanding alone, of course, is not enough. One of our problems is that we tend to separate ourselves as persons from our knowledge or understanding. And if we understand or know about the need for environmental protection but do not apply it in our daily lives, we're not going to achieve anything. Our knowledge, our understanding has to become so intimate, so personal to us, that it naturally changes our behavior, that we feel it emotionally and in our hearts.
Then you understand, ngajo condition knowledge di ngajo gi misi da jabe yabachi kuyu sungyup chiadi misi da jabe yabachi dang sosu gi da kanda khachwe sosu da tegar didu da jabe yabachi to ne ngodru chia dang ti tolya samdwa di kechum shu chadi do sam.
We need, therefore, to reflect upon the fact that our knowledge of the environment really is a knowledge of something that's going to affect our lives, a knowledge of something that is going to affect our well-being.
Today, you stand that tea chodling energy because spiritual traditions and around religious tradition, the Zugi Kashre Shefshi Drutuya and Shemdi Drutuya, Mango Kashre, Shemdi Drutuyachi, younger Sabed, Ishays.
And I think it is in that regard that spiritual and religious traditions can serve the cause of environmental stewardship.
That is Nanga Chibu Mane, and Azugi, Kashrin Zamling Chulu, Samiegi, Tigi Kashreji, Shemdi did Drutuyak, Ishamboyala, and Tanashing Azugi Kashre, indigenous. The culture, the ancestor, the Zugi wisdom, ancient wisdom, the Zugi tending the Tolimina, Azugi, that the environmental protections that the Tadu Zamaimba, the Tsini Zamaimba, the conditions Suzuki, Mizina Lolia, Suzuki, the Sonanda Jevda. Ning Tabane di Mizina Lola, La Lente Dalia, Denden di Kashung Azula, Jidijom Chabala, Rom Chet or something.
And when I say religious traditions, I don't just mean Buddhist traditions. I mean every religious tradition in this world can play its part. And I'm confident that if we do this, if we work together, if we apply the knowledge that is embodied in the many indigenous cultures that have survived, the ancient wisdom of our ancestors, we will be able to discover together that environmental protection is not just a point of view, not just a science, but must be a way of life.
Umam David needs Australia, as a city badang, Chulu Sidusane, Takuning Gawan Ganda Dochi. The Hindustan, the Jigji, some Jigjana Tan, Jigjana Samsamia, enemy of Chiki, Chulu would science Gabagab, scientists is Chulu Gabagab thing as such, Jigjin Gabagara ching as such. Tai Yimbinea, we need to tell Yimbina, Tangazuji, Samsam. Tumong Tone, Azugi, draw me down, and Dana Shingi, 마음 전불링기 마음 배치에도 튜모고 토안에 냠도 시시 주도하던데 용스가 빼나 구육 내단 디레 토르 체비미나 덴덴다 튜모고 토안에 아주 시시 주고하디 칸데도하디 삼동하디 개심브레 가르사나 구육 내된디 beyond somewhere religion beyond the political to chaye be indusan 아주 삶에 냠도 자주고하디 개심이 비지 라는 게 동의였어.
At various times in our history, science and religion have seemed to be contradictory to one another, have even become enemies, attacked one another, or to be more polite, refuted one another. But really, there is a great commonality of experience that we all share. We're all human beings living in the same world, relying on the same environment. And therefore, on that basis, on the basis of acknowledging our shared or common experience, we have to accept that the protection of this environment is beyond the views of any one religion.
제장 아주지 참바다 니지기 뉘라 땅 아주 contradictory 게요 말은 something도 참바다 니지기 뉘라 드린주스탄에 아주 냠도 내가 레고아티 때 아주 냠도 take responsibility 제제 냠도 내가 레고아디 때 개좀 쉽지다디 라바도 구역 내되는 데 가서 자차고 싶차디 가래 제장 아주다 scientist 망부치기 아주 가르에 information 망고지기 아래 때 이내 망고지리아 information 망고지리아 안에 디 다부겸 라렌타에 다니 매베감 단도다 가바장에데 망고용데 그러나 climate scientist this 가바장에데 드리두산 디균세데네 아주 개념도 그거에 개념이 있어서
If we base our approach to environmental stewardship on being loving and compassionate, there should be no contradiction between science and spirituality. We can undertake and share our common responsibility for this environment, and in that way actually put into practice and make practical use of the information that scientists give us about the environment and not live as though we are in denial of it.
다들 배낭아란 가져야되지 bendangazu 비게 히말라야다 아니 벽이 사스디 엔데지 가르에 에시아 지 가르에 춘주엔더치 추윤주엔더치 자대야 지당 다네 삼자 third poles 가래 제가 구요도안에 산에 계진을 자대야래 제가 디 구요를 숨겨지야 걸 야당 디도래 지 가르에 고도배야 제도 아주디 토마 지 히말라야다 régulier gwendetizulianga so lobsutresi an ko zu kuyudi kechimi kuyu kolia kodobe an dene yuche energy karwe community lia shugen tedoya azu bezur kiyares.
The Himalaya, including the Tibetan Plateau, are considered a treasury of water that feed the great rivers of Asia and therefore supply so much water that sometimes the Himalaya is called a third pole. Therefore, we have to be especially concerned with the environment in the Himalaya and the conservation of water there. So what we have tried to do is train monasteries in best Himalayan monasteries in best environmental practices so that they can then present these to their local or neighboring communities.
제가 도망 어디 제인두산에 아니 상월로지 가서리 very emotional 서머베지 심규시라 대제 아니 다지 아주직 지기 있어서지 미망부지리아 심규시 뭐시비 구마시비 대야래 얘네 안 참상 아주라다 lack of 서브레 다지 knowledge 서브레 scientific knowledge 당 안다는 신기 technique 디종 아줄리아 용용이비 변 그렇지 아주 통디가래 제가 딘데 제제 참삼 아줄리아 엔 체리브 디즈기 갑겨로 가야지당 체리베 로람 가야지 데니두상 아주 상만냠도 레갈이야 여지당 냠도 에너지 셔시 가르에 점링기 펜디체 셔시 줘야 여지 아주 이렇게다 용촌로지 근데 총송
When this subject was first introduced to representatives of these monasteries, they were immediately emotionally affected and demonstrated tremendous commitment to environmental stewardship in their region. But at the same time, we lack scientific knowledge and technical expertise. So in order to do this, we need the support of the scientific community and the assistance of the scientific community. And I mention this as an example of how, in order to preserve our environment, we all need to work together and offer our individual skills and knowledge.
다바지 드린 슈아드르 지미다 안디 슈들이야 트워틀린 샤로 딘지 유스레 인도스탄에 안당에 타마들이야 상으로들이 대표들이야 두시 슈아지당 안에
I'm going to end my initial address or talk with that, and we'll begin the conversation. Before we do, however, I again want to thank each and every one of you for coming here and convey to you my sincere delight in having this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you hand me a glass of water?
Thank you, Your Holiness, and thank you, translator.
Yeah.
We wanted to begin by picking up on a point that you've made earlier
Yes.
about the root of compassion is having a steadfast heart, the power of the heart. And this work with the environment for many people can be discouraging because it's so overwhelming right now. So could you speak about this need for a steadfast heart, the power of the heart in compassion?
Oh, power. Daddy, activist, somewhere. The activist, activist marche, Tinane, Karjurada, Kurugi, activist marche, takes emotional shadow. Once a daisy, Karjuradaji, Kuzugi, Bezumang Cheneang, just Sancho, you are twine maybe in the marche controlanding it chadisha. Not to what's at least near to what's.
Well, first of all, I would say that many activists, and especially environmental activists, naturally become highly emotionally invested in their activism. And when after years and years of very hard work, they don't see a great deal of result, they can become a little bit embittered and angry.
And Danaji some Karasna and Krugi Golamango Shen, this time, Tajik Chandra, Nisha, the Wigan and Shen, this time, not to Ningen this way. Taji Kasu Daisy, some Gun Chan, Tanyanga to some Titani.
And if you spend enough time listening to one dire prediction about the future of this planet after another from environmental scientists, even we listeners can develop a little bit of a problem in our brains.
Yeah. The Hindustan, Yanam this activists at Lia, ni yong de jig de gara sa nga zu samar lo activist jig jilia shugen de ye bin sa nga zu gi ke ma ka su nga zu gi ke ma lam bin activist cha de jig yong ya.
I think there are two levels or types of activism, and the one is what we all practice. We can practice it by being supportive of intensive activism, but even if we are in denial of the need for environmental activism because we're having an effect on the environment, you can call it a type of mere activism.
jig de tang do lang ne ka shui mi yu ji song de tang do lang ne de duya che do be zu cha de activist yong ni yong de gar ba ta de du sa ne ta nge sam lo de ka ra sa na kan da nga zu gi active nga zu ta ka shui nam ju ne jig ji le shu gen te de ye bi du sa ta de shu gen te ye ba ha ko na ta de le sang cho shu gen te nyen ji gi activist ji ka ra che ne ma che 대 미제비 균제요 말어 가르잖아 남준이 슈겐테 되가 그래 제가 대 균제되네 슈겐테 되도 하고 인두사네 아니 상교 쇼 교와 동년지기 에 가서 액티비스트 미제 균제 가인 바다 대지 섬동하지 유서 sometimes.
The other type of activist is what we would normally refer to as an environmental activist, and that's someone who intentionally undertakes responsibility and puts great effort into the achievement of, in this case, environmental goals and changes. I think that one thing that's very important is for those of us who are less directly involved to take some responsibility and be supportive as much as we can of environmental activism, because if you look at the situation, there is absolutely no reason not to support environmental activism.
다들이 인두스탄에 빼는 안 잡지 임이나 다들 vegetarian 차대요. 다 디기 가저 vegetarian 사대 수수 제투야지. 남사 제초야 수수 바 타젠 미신다 고마고 제 수수 바 타젠 지야 주민 디응알에 심슈를 징도스. 그 수수 군에 그 숨급 체도 자와지 주심버도 그지당. 다지 다 가다 지기 위해서 말이지. 드린 디 균선되나 아주 여기다 지 심슈 봐야려. 된다 다 가서 지 차와려 무슨 주부 임비나 아니 정신기 가서 지금 알아서 something
To use myself as an example, I'm a vegetarian. And becoming vegetarian, which in my case is partly for environmental reasons, is something that anyone can do. It doesn't require an organization, it doesn't require the extensive scientific knowledge or anything like that. But nevertheless, as simple as it is, when you do that, when you make that kind of change in your life, it's very encouraging because you realize that you are not without power. You have the ability, even as one person, to do at least something that is beneficial to the environment.
제가 수수는 거 중요하대. 수수진 유아스 땅나 수수 미진한데 수수기 소야는 유아스 땅이나 되기 수술래야 뽑아친 부지 진도로 상정도스.
I think that the greatest source of courage for us in environmental stewardship comes from making such simple changes in our lives and realizing how much power we do have.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so Your Holiness, just to follow up on that last point, you raised the question in The Heart is Noble, where you said, what does it take for our ideas to move our heart? So that is, what is it that moves us to overcome our habits and desires like meat eating or mass consumerism? So I wonder if you could say a little bit about what it means to move past good intentions and move into actual action.
That's an echo, actually.
Samba zombo the nyeta ne tromba gi dep ke nana sombare. Samba zombo samji drigamaris ngusa lalen gogados.
So
Penati sha pangwa dawo dang mass consumerism pangwa la so pade. The samba zombo samdang lalen gi bata ke java kare yo te samba dawo kare yo.
also consumerism. You were talking about?
Yes.
Sure.
Oh yeah. Samba Samazo, you call me Lale.
Lalan tayak. Samba zombo yanang, lalan tago, just lalan tayak. You mean how to bridge
Yeah.
good intentions into the Samba zombo dang, ngusa lalan tawa ke bata ke sampar dawa.
Bridge. Tahaja, bridge. That Delia, that didn't Java Yemeka, she's in landscape. Actually, you can repeat that again.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Well, Your Holiness, you mentioned yourself, you've written before and in talks that you've given that when you were quite young, you were
Yeah.
fond of eating meat, but you had the good intention of giving that up. You now
Yeah.
are vegetarian.
Yes.
And that is taking a good intention and putting it into
Still, I
action.
like meat, but it's okay.
But many people wonder how to take a good intention and to actually put it into practice.
Okay. Practice. Daddy. Can Lord, Daddy. Penanga, already. Penanga round of Simina, and it's a career. Chundu ni Shasayare. And the English that the Shamasan lodges to God. That Chesang took long time, took long time, Kizamataka, Lomang Wichel Dose Debre. Chidan Shasa, the Yabu Mevachi Hakuare. In a Yabu Meva Haku, Guela, and no Stadia.
Well, to use the example you brought up, my vegetarianism, as you mentioned, as a child, I ate meat. In fact, I only stopped eating meat about 8 years ago. So I kept on eating meat for many years. But I knew it was wrong. I still ate it.
The Hindustan Ninji Senator, Takanda, Ningdop Telia, Kashur, Ninki Tops Dustan, Takanda Telia, Shundaji, Susu Pargua, the Ketchum Shuchi, Kashur, Susu Tando Langne, Gain Kurche. As you done Gain Kurne, Tajia, Gain Kurwata, and Dana Shingi, Tamjawa Samana, Tamjawa, Tajia, the Nijiguada, Ketchum Chadi, Marathon, Tango. Tamja and Ginkurdi and Susugi Susulia and Gain, which could Susulia, Tamja or Cheche, and Susugi Takar Langati, Savage Sogati, Matulia, Dengue or something else.
In that type of case, I think that the bridge is a type of compassion, a type of courage, the power of your heart. And by the power of your heart, I mean that which enables us to decide once and for all to take responsibility for our own actions as individuals, to be able to commit ourselves to accepting and fulfilling our responsibilities as a person.
Today, understand understanding tell a more deeper kind of the emotional level of my that take action with Chagwadi, that catch of Chadiare. Nam Jung Azugi, Semunalolia, to Mamut advisor Mamuchi on that, the niche and I would the niche and contain some. In Jimmy, that's to take action with Chagwada, the Gypsy sometimes.
So the bridge is that a mere understanding become more emotionally felt, and a deep emotional feeling based on understanding will inspire us to take action. Once we listen to the advice of our hearts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You spoke on science and religion, a very important topic, a very complex topic. I'd love you to speak a little bit more because for many years, scientists have been speaking about climate change and the environment. And now there's a new moment when some scientists are saying this is no longer an issue of science alone, but a moral issue. And that's what your work encourages us in this new dialogue of science and religion. Can you speak on that?
Wow. 아주디 가르다 다 공부수문은 시대 구육 내던데 빵랑게 내던지 차례도 성노스 the moral issue 락바도 아주기 구육 내단데 crucial 내단 연구에 취급이 가르서는 아주기 human greed som을보다지 드라미기 안 명함나 되네 총대비치 명함 된 아주기다지 media the digital and increase chiga advertise increase chiga tell dene ngaju sanglo do gashweji gashweda yimbina ngaju gin dengamla tayo mane debal genre mane ina rengjung kuruki resource telea genre ya deni lusa tikyunzen dene ngaju ngebara du sosu 아주 개인 코르 등함되는 개인 코르지 컨트롤 시작하다 개침시다. 이내다디 가르베지 다대 토로 의니즈 토리아 더 깔아갑시가. 제가 안다디 최저 토하는 랍지 체고. 네 삼발에 최 랍지 사디 personal practitioner person 미 게소솔리아 지 펜도 예버전도 마세비 최저 토하는 베너지 global issues 말에 베너지 구육 내도에나 gender issue에 디지털 이미나 최저 토하는 땡땡기 가르베지 디지털 이미나 최 토하는 마 가르베지 랑도르기 랑가 세브지 된 거아디 개점 시브레 삼청게였어 삼삼 띵아 주기 최 우리의 디지털은 삼삼 딱딱지 디 제토가 많았어 디 삼성 아주 디제 feeling 아주 디저 원사버를 용도스 다 간다량 다다디 구육 내된디 다다디 지 가르레 치기 내된 സമയ바 다디 낭기 로미 셈기 내된 차디 대단 잡아시비지 시저디 될 차디가 어려서 정도스 디 차디 여기 인주산 된지기 균론되는 요아 마신 봐도 안에 구율이야 요아 동사다 가라고 싶지 구율이야 산정 요아야서 가라고 싶지 자대 어려서 정도 디 균zen되는 데려야 아니 최저 돈에 아니 지카르웨 based on scientific knowledge 다나신기 가르웨지 information 디토하는 구육 가르웨 the key nobody 가르웨다지 아주 로고체아키 아주 다 motivation 로고체아 key nobody 아니 최저 디토하는 제투야지 용거를 삼정도 랍제테야지
As you said, environmental protection or conservation is fundamentally a moral issue. And the reason, the crucial factor in it that makes it a moral issue is that the degradation or destruction of the environment has been caused by human greed. And our human greed, bad enough as it is to start with, has only been exacerbated, fed by our media and our advertising industry. The problem we face, therefore, is that human desire is limitless, but environmental resources are limited. And therefore, it is our responsibility as those who depend on these resources to rein in and control our greed. In order that we start doing so, it is essential that religious leaders, spiritual teachers, not only preach about individual practice issues or individual moral codes, but also about global issues. and that they provide in moral guidance on environmental stewardship, because they are the ones who can evoke feeling, evoke enthusiasm, evoke an emotional commitment in their followers. Until we accept the fact that our environment is not external to us, it pervades us, it's within our bodies and our minds as well, it will be difficult for us to change our behavior. But the key to becoming really motivated to change the way we live and thereby begin to heal the environment, the key that will open the door to that type of motivation seems to be in the hands of those religious and spiritual leaders who are willing to provide moral guidance concerning the environment that is based on sound scientific knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, Your Holiness, you spoke about the practice of dissolving the distinction between subject and object, the inner and outer worlds. And of course, there are many techniques for putting that into practice in meditation. You can study about that, you can practice it. But I wonder, does the practice of dissolving that distinction naturally lead to a feeling of connection for the environment, for an appreciation of the environment?
No. Appreciation. Nga zu nam ju rang da xian sa di the practice ma wu xiang di are ben da xin nyam be gi meditation to ne da xin nyam be kwa ne jing a sang lo ji di du chuo ye be ji gu yin ju sa ne nga ran di du chuo ye be na mi xin da di du chuo ye yin ju sa a zu sam ji gu re sa da ji de to meditation ja da di gi ji ka zu nga zu gi da xin nyam be di la leng to la 냠랭 토라 자지 되는 정도이 알아. 다가는 신가서 당신 제와스 두스다네. 다 델레양 즉체 토르 체체. 아니 정이 베지 다다 신사지 코사 타데도 매버치지. 정이 다디기 차시에도 좀 다디 신디 차시암 신디도 차. 아니 신디란 니도 치도 차. 정이 진짜 차 차베 토네. 아니 디기 디도르야 촌알이야. 수수기 wholeheartedly 100%ly 가르쳐 초르도 배치하지 이런 데 요래 다가는 신기 대단냐므로 지금 아주 여기 구유고 돌아 이미네요 땡땡이 대단냐버지기 가르쳐야지 냠래 선하다 meditation 땡데 차유기를 섬처럼 뒀어
We have a number of meditation practices, as you mentioned in your question, concerned with dissolving, the false boundary between self and other. One of these is contemplating the equality of oneself and others, which is fundamentally developing an empathetic recognition that just as I want to be happy and not suffer, so do others, and that in that we're exactly the same. And once you have taken this to heart, then of course you have to put it into practice and live accordingly. We also do meditations on exchanging oneself for others, where you actually imagine yourself in the position of another and that other in the position of yourself. And you try to imagine as wholeheartedly, as 100% as possible, how they feel, what they're going through, and then apply that. So there should be ways to extrapolate from these techniques and apply them to environmental awareness.
배나가지고 행동으로 삼다미는 지신 나서야듯이 나저기 오크시즌 그저 땅배 오크시즌의 양우 나저 파 땅배기지 카본 다이옥사이드 다다 다디 그저 파우 들으시거라 나저 그저 땅아데 나저 땅아데 그저 우 들으시듯한다디 지 나저 남기 동랭기 자디 아니 지 삼동무 버런신데 예데베서 근데 그 토네 간다는 아주지 우기 교화 직보인데 비지 우글럼 직제데 비지 우기 교화 직보인데 비지 아주 다 간다지 우 당서를 직인데 비지 근데 지금 토리아 아니 지금 메디테이션 세비는 땡땡 아주 손앙한테 지금 간다 미신도 비지 나로 데 우기 교화 직보 교회 랑가를 직보인 근데 지금 동안 지금 something
For example, if we think about the fact that trees, so to speak, breathe out what we need to breathe in, oxygen, and we breathe out carbon dioxide, which they seem to need to, so to speak, breathe in, so that our exhaust is their air, and their exhaust is our air. This is something we don't need to imagine. This is a fact. So if you contemplate that, just the interrelationship or interconnectedness of breathing, of our breathing and the vegetation, things that grow, that could be a meditation technique in and of itself. Because if you feel that, you realize that we're really two parts of one whole machine or one whole system.
We wanted to give a chance for a few questions from the audience which were submitted in advance.
Yes.
So maybe two out of some very good questions.
Thank you.
The first one is on climate change. Climate change, or global warming, appears to be the world's greatest crisis. But there are many people who deny global warming exists. What advice would you give to working with people in the government who believe there is no need to protect the environment?
Oh, I don't have all the solutions. I think this is,
You don't have to answer it either.
this, that really, the Kashmir, 초진이 구육이 윤도와서 남식이 윤도 climate change 사드 야천부 쉬우지 야치다 최네 딘 윤도 내가 주다 고좀 디 초르도 야치다 좀 초르면도 따이는 니머지 초와 준비 걸라 직전에 출래 차대 그렇지 네 인도산 디균제 되네 deny 챙기듯이 지보 말에 지당 미규마듯이 고주디 climate change yarasana de hira karsure pena thingsa pheliya dengen disul khabar dan jusa karsane phel namshi thangmo yorwa jesa kudu nima twa kabar ste trail kabar thangmo yeso ta thingsang khade do la thingsang ya bodo namshi charu chin ya bodo su kudu di charu chin ba dubu je thongwa ma ta ya bodo den da ji yonde yare de ine adi ki telia dangi kondu shubana singi 다지 politician 다 망부지 deny 치가 알아데 이면에 다기 건수변에 생각주기 아니 최저 그 religious leader 디줄레 데벨체 디지 그 토안에 디주기 도슈를 되네 아주 faith in culturally devotion is somewhat that 디지 그 도슈를 되네 아주기 디 culture 된데 다 아주 climate change 다 안다는 신기 구역에 내든 디조 가시로다지 슈체르 동토야지 용그르섬 루스탱도스.
Well, the climate change is a huge process. It's very vast. It has all kinds of sub bits and pieces, and it's a somewhat gradual process, so that we don't directly feel it or notice it day by day. By the time that we all feel climate change, it will be far too late to do anything about it. So there really are two levels of denial here. There's the denial of those who are actual climate change deniers, politicians and others. And then there's the denial that most of us live in of climate change, where because we don't actually feel it it's not really in our minds most of the time. And then there are little pockets of odd reactions. For example, Tibet is a very cold country. It's often hard to get warm enough. And so the global warming, some Tibetans have greeted this with enthusiasm, saying it doesn't get as cold as it used to. It's much more pleasant. As for what to do about politicians and others who are active or outspoken climate change deniers, the best thing might be to appeal to support from religious and spiritual leaders, because they have so much influence over their respective communities or devotees.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Your Holiness, the last question is one a number of our undergraduate students asked. And that is, how can students in a university like Yale organize themselves to take fruitful and positive action for the environment? What can they do that's practical?
당이 고시는 시에 지단기 environment 지 demonstration 치아단 드리지 아주 지 다나 신기 디톨이야 베너지 가르쳐야지 미세기 take action 루치아 망보 중요한데 가래 따이는 개치슈디 당보 수수는 거주야데 개치슈도 없어 그래서 수수기 교환을 당한지 제비미나 되게 된된지 수수지 제비 인류상 될 댄시네 에 수술해야지 인도 전부 깨야지 시자 야고 싶지 중원에서 대매비 체제 수수응의 미센 교화스케 당만 위치 미신다지 지게 삼제 드리지 레와르지 expectation 제비나 다 디기 삼성 가솔이야데 지 수수 지 가서 레와 센라 같은데기 지 가서에 레와 세비 천나 미진빙 해봐요. 스트림디 유저들 수수는 고주가데 다시 지게 좀 안 상으로 미제레신도 지기질이야 수수응에는 유아 그리고 갈아가서 방지 디는 고주지 간다 구육이 가르쳐지 프로텍션사 디는 고주지 자데 다게 개좀 쉽지만도 something도 다나지 수수기 aspiration디 아니 수 미신다 수수도 명함 집어여 봐 디수도 냠도 루루체지 and so aspiration the long lean de somewhere kergan de my bichi aspiration the da karso tumongi aspiration which tabchi the jig also take action cha the catch medicine.
Of course, there are several things we can do as groups or communities. The usual types of environmental activism, demonstrations, raising our voice, and so on. But fundamentally, each of us has to start with ourselves. Because the only solid basis for the type of courage it's going to take to actually make these changes comes when you have made changes in your own life and have begun to feel the effects of that. And that courage can't be taken away from you, so you won't lose it in the process of a long career of activism. Otherwise, if we attempt to change or convince others to change without having changed the way we live our lives ourselves, we will be fueling ourselves not with an internal courage but with expectations. And when others don't change the way we would like them to, we'll become disillusioned and possibly totally burnt out altogether. So we have to start, whatever we may do on a social or communal level, we have to start by making individual changes in our own lives. And then another thing that is necessary is to have a support community, a supportive community of those who share one's own environmental aspirations and ideals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to conclude by thanking His Holiness for reigniting hope this evening. And I'd like to say it was 20 years ago that we began a project at Harvard, actually, with one of the first conferences on Buddhism and ecology.
Yes.
and then the other world religions and ecology. But it is our great joy that Yale has picked up this idea that religions and ecology can work together, which you have highlighted today. And our School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, with the students there and students from religious studies and divinity, I think are giving us hope because they understand this. They want to work with your communities, and we want to figure ways into the future. I want to end, though, with a special thanks to our dean, Peter Crane, who has held up this effort between the School of Forestry, Environmental Studies, and Divinity. And tomorrow night, we're going to continue the conversation with Peter Crane, scientists, ethicists, and so on, between these two schools to examine the new papal encyclical, which will be coming out this summer exactly on this issue, which can affect 1 billion Catholics, 2 billion Christians, but be in dialogue with the efforts that you're doing. So tomorrow night at Lindsay Hall on High Street at 5:30, we invite you to join in this discussion that will complement the wonderful words that you have given us tonight. Thank you for your hope, and please come back to Yale to visit us.
Please do come
Thank
back.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.